The Galactic Empire was known across the stars as a force that could conquer worlds without mercy. It controlled countless planets, each filled with advanced technology, massive fleets, and soldiers trained to obey without question. To the leaders of the Empire, there were no surprises in the universe. Every planet, every civilization seemed predictable. But then came the reports about a small blue planet called Earth, and something about it made even the most confident officers uneasy. A scouting team had traveled far beyond the known regions of space and observed Earth from orbit. They sent back messages that were short and urgent, unusual energy patterns, strange signals, and behaviors that could not be explained with the Empire's science. "This planet is a trap," one of the scouts had written, and the words were meant to sound like a warning. Yet when the report reached the grand halls of the Empire, it was treated as a curiosity at best, an exaggeration at worst. The Council of Leaders listened politely, nodding at the words, but their minds were already made up. The Empire had faced countless worlds, some hostile, some weak, and none had ever challenged them in the way this report hinted at. The generals exchanged quiet smiles. "A trap?" one of them said. "On a planet like this? Impossible. It is small, primitive, and isolated. There is nothing to fear." Scientists added their voices, explaining that the odd readings could be natural phenomena. Perhaps the planet's magnetic field was unusual, or its atmosphere played tricks on sensors. The leaders clung to these explanations. Fear of the unknown had no place in the Empire's decisions. Orders were given, ships were prepared, fleets assembled, and the machinery of conquest began to move. There was a sense of excitement in the air among the troops. They believed they were about to take another easy victory, another jewel for the Empire's crown. No one considered that the warning might hold truth, that Earth was more than it seemed. Meanwhile, on the surface of the planet, life went on. People moved through cities, towns, and villages, unaware of the massive ships that had begun to appear in the sky above them. Daily struggles occupied their minds: work, family, survival. But there was a rhythm to human life, a resilience that had built up over thousands of years. It was subtle, invisible from space, but it was part of what made the planet unique. Humans worked together without knowing the patterns they created could confuse the most advanced sensors. Their instinctive responses to danger were unpredictable, and their adaptability was extraordinary. Back on the flagship of the Empire, the commanders began plotting their invasion. They studied the maps of the planet, the limited intelligence reports, and the advice of their scientists. They believed they knew every detail, every weakness. Nothing could stop them. The warning, "Earth is a trap," seemed almost humorous, like the fears of an inexperienced scout. Pride had blinded them, and they ignored the growing unease that gnawed quietly at some officers' minds. As the fleet approached Earth, small anomalies began to appear. Instruments that should have worked perfectly showed strange errors. Communications between ships were delayed or distorted. Even the simplest calculations about orbit and trajectory required adjustments that no one could explain. Some of the younger officers began to whisper among themselves, asking if the warnings might have been real, but the senior leaders dismissed them. Any suggestion that they might be walking into danger was considered weakness, a failure to trust in the Empire's power. The scouts who first sent the warnings watched silently from the observation decks. They had seen the signs before the rest of the fleet, subtle hints in the energy readings and the unusual behavior of the planet's magnetic fields. They had tried to emphasize the danger, but their words had been lost in the arrogance of the Empire. Now, as the fleet drew closer, the scouts could only hope that their concerns would not be proven right. On the planet below, humans noticed the strange patterns in the skies. Satellites flickered and strange lights appeared at night. Military radar systems picked up odd signals, but no one could fully understand them. It was as if the planet itself had a way of protecting itself, using the natural environment in ways no human fully understood. Yet to the casual observer, life seemed normal, and the warning from the stars felt like a distant story, something almost mythic. By the time the Empire's ships arrived in orbit, the warning had moved from an ignored suggestion to a quiet anxiety. Officers who had laughed at the report now felt unease creeping into their thoughts. Still, orders were orders, and the first step toward invasion was taken. Troops prepared their weapons and plans were finalized. No one wanted to admit that they were about to test their strength against a force they could not see, a defense they could not predict. And so, The first chapter of the confrontation was set. A planet that had survived billions of years of change, evolution, and unseen coordination awaited the Empire. A warning had been sent, clear and urgent, but it had been brushed aside. The leaders of the Empire believed they were unstoppable, confident that their knowledge and power were absolute. But Earth had its own rules. It had its own intelligence, its own way of adapting. And the moment when the Empire would realize their mistake was approaching faster than anyone could imagine. The trap had been prepared not by machines or armies, but by the subtle patterns of life itself, patterns that the Empire had ignored. And that ignorance would soon cost them dearly. The sky over Earth seemed calm, peaceful even, but the truth was hidden in the smallest details. A shift in the wind, a minor change in the planet's magnetic field, the rhythm of the oceans. Every part of Earth's natural system was ready to respond to intruders. Humans, unaware of the cosmic drama above, went about their lives with curiosity, fear, joy, and confusion. They had no idea they were living on the edge of an event that would challenge one of the greatest powers in the galaxy. And so, as the Empire moved closer, confidence still shining in their eyes, the first mistake was already made. They had dismissed the warning, laughed at the cautionary voices, and prepared to take Earth as if it were no more than a stepping stone. The stage was set and the universe held its breath, waiting for what would come next. The Galactic Empire's massive fleet hovered over Earth, the blue planet glinting in the sunlight like a jewel. From orbit it looked peaceful, almost fragile, and yet the officers aboard the flagship believed it was beneath them. They had faced planets with hostile environments, volcanic worlds, and chemical storms, yet none had ever made them feel uneasy, until now. Small anomalies began to show in the instruments, but they were dismissed as minor errors, unworthy of concern. The first move was simple: establish contact. Drones were sent to orbit, scanning the planet's surface and relaying data back to the fleet. They expected little resistance, assuming the humans were primitive, disorganized, and incapable of defending themselves against an interstellar fleet. But the readings were strange. Signals bounced back that the Empire could not trace. Interference patterns appeared where there should have been none, and some drones vanished entirely, never returning. Officers whispered about it, some nervously, but the leadership maintained calm, convinced the planet's oddities were natural phenomena. Then came the landing operation. Ships descended toward the surface, carrying soldiers and advanced machinery. The first steps on Earth were supposed to be routine, a show of power, a message that the Empire was unstoppable. But as the ships approached, strange occurrences began to unfold. Electrical systems malfunctioned without explanation, shields flickered and engines sputtered. One landing pod, fully operational moments before, veered off course and crashed into a forest, leaving no survivors. On the surface, humans reacted instinctively. Soldiers patrolling the forests and cities noticed odd patterns in the skies. Satellites seemed to disappear, and instruments misbehaved. Scientists struggled to understand what was happening, chalking it up to electromagnetic anomalies. Ordinary people noticed only that something was off. Birds changed their flight paths, weather patterns shifted unpredictably, and natural disasters seemed to appear at the wrong time, as if responding to the invading ships. Inside the Empire's command room, officers tried to explain the failures logically. They calculated probabilities, ran simulations, and adjusted strategies. Nothing worked. The planet seemed to anticipate every move, reacting in ways the fleet could not predict. Even minor adjustments led to cascading failures in the ship's systems. The generals, once confident, grew silent. Fear was creeping into their thoughts, though none wanted to admit it. Pride and training demanded they maintain composure, even as events spiraled beyond understanding. As the first troops began to disembark, the subtle defenses became more apparent. Vehicles stalled without warning. Communications jammed at critical moments. Drones sent to map the terrain returned scrambled or destroyed. Even the soldiers' tools malfunctioned inexplicably, creating frustration and confusion. It was as if the planet itself had a mind, adapting to the Empire's movements in real time. Humans, still unaware of the larger scale of the conflict, noticed the Empire's machines failing and began to respond naturally. Farmers moving livestock, fishermen adjusting nets, and engineers repairing power lines all seemed to work in ways that indirectly hindered the invading forces. The Empire could not recognize it as strategy. It was the instinctive intelligence of life on Earth, a collective force that the fleet's calculations could not comprehend. Inside the flagship, scientists pored over the data. Magnetic fields, energy patterns, and atmospheric readings all indicated something unusual. The planet emitted pulses of energy that interfered with the fleet's instruments, but no one could determine the source. Some proposed that it was a natural phenomenon amplified by the planet's rotation and unique properties. Others quietly speculated that Earth was intelligent in ways that went beyond their understanding. The suggestion was dangerous, though, because it implied that the Empire could be outmatched by a primitive world. Orders were issued to intensify the assault. Soldiers deployed automated systems to neutralize the planet's interference, and engineers attempted to override the anomalies. But every effort failed. Machines malfunctioned in ways that defied logic. Weapons misfired, vehicles stalled, and drones were destroyed without apparent cause. The more the Empire tried to force the planet into submission, the more unpredictable and chaotic the situation became. Fear spread among the officers, though none admitted it openly. The scouts who had originally sent warnings watched silently, their worst fears coming true. The phrase "Earth is a trap" no longer seemed like an exaggeration. It was becoming a reality. The Empire had assumed intelligence only came in ways they could measure, through fleets, armies, or structured technology. Earth had intelligence of a different kind, subtle and adaptive, growing stronger as the invasion continued. Despite the chaos, the leadership remained determined. Retreat was unthinkable, pride too great to admit failure. Orders continued, sending more troops, more machinery, and more weapons to the surface. But with each deployment, the Empire's confidence eroded. The planet's natural systems continued to resist, seemingly learning from every attack. Storms shifted at the right moments. Rivers flooded machinery, and forests redirected troops without ever appearing to move. Every small failure became a large one, and every attempt to control the planet created new problems. On Earth, life continued in ways that were both ordinary and extraordinary. People went about their days, unaware that their very routines were frustrating the Empire's plans. Animals acted instinctively, natural systems reacted unpredictably, and the planet's atmosphere itself seemed to interfere with the invaders' technology. It was not chaos in the human sense. It was the planet protecting itself, a defense that no weapon could match. As the sun set on the first day of the invasion, the fleet retreated slightly to reassess. The Empire had entered the orbit of a trap it could not see clearly. The once confident generals were now uneasy, whispering among themselves, questioning strategies that had seemed infallible just hours before. The scouts who had warned about Earth felt vindicated but also helpless, knowing that their words had come too late to prevent the initial chaos. The planet's defenses were not flashy. There were no giant weapons, no sudden explosions. Instead, the resistance was quiet, patient, and persistent. It was woven into every part of life on Earth: the weather, the terrain, the behaviors of humans and animals alike. The Empire had underestimated it completely, believing that their technology alone could overcome any challenge. They had misread the subtle intelligence of life itself. Inside the flagship, the leadership gathered for an emergency meeting. Tension was thick in the air, and even the most seasoned officers admitted that the situation was becoming unpredictable. Calculations had failed, instruments had malfunctioned, and the fleet had suffered its first losses. They realized that the warnings had been serious, that Earth was not a simple planet to conquer, and that the invasion would not be the swift victory they had imagined. As night fell across Earth, the planet remained calm, almost serene. From space it seemed quiet, unassuming. Yet the first signs of its resistance had already reshaped the battlefield. The Empire had been confident, powerful, and unyielding. They had ignored the warning. And now, slowly, the reality was setting in. This planet was more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The first encounter had ended not with a decisive victory, but with confusion, frustration, and fear. The Empire had underestimated Earth, and the consequences of that mistake were beginning to show. The planet's subtle, adaptive defenses had turned what was supposed to be a routine invasion into a complicated puzzle, one that no one aboard the flagship could yet solve, and so, the stage was set for the next phase of the conflict. Earth remained a trap, waiting quietly while the Empire struggled to understand the planet it had dismissed. The first contact had already revealed one truth. No amount of technology or pride could replace awareness, humility, and respect for a world that refused to be conquered. The Galactic Empire had now been in Earth's orbit for several days, and what was supposed to be a simple occupation was quickly turning into a nightmare. Every plan they made seemed to fail. Soldiers who had trained their whole lives for conquest were beginning to doubt themselves, and even the most confident officers were questioning their orders. The planet below seemed alive in a way they had never experienced. The first wave of troops tried to move inland, expecting little resistance. They assumed that humans were weak, scattered, and unprepared, but as soon as they attempted to establish outposts, strange events began to unfold. Vehicles would stall for no reason, weapons misfired or jammed inexplicably, automated drones would veer off course or crash without warning. The Empire had advanced technology, faster and more precise than anything humans had ever created. Yet Earth seemed to fight back using nothing more than its natural systems and the instinctive intelligence of its people. Humans noticed the machines failing, though they didn't understand why. Soldiers, engineers, and civilians all reacted in ways that seemed small at first. A fisherman moving his boat to avoid debris, a farmer rerouting livestock away from a road. But these actions added up. The Empire's forces were constantly being disrupted by things that were invisible and unpredictable. Every attempt to push forward met resistance, not from a traditional army but from the planet itself. The generals aboard the flagship were furious. They called meeting after meeting, demanding explanations from their scientists. Data from sensors showed no known source for the malfunctions, and simulations provided no answers. Some officers suggested retreat, quietly arguing that the planet had properties they could not overcome. But pride and fear of dishonor kept the Empire committed to the invasion. They had sent their fleets and soldiers halfway across the galaxy. They could not leave now without facing humiliation. Meanwhile, the subtle defenses of Earth became more pronounced. Storms would develop seemingly overnight, delaying or redirecting troops. Rivers swelled and redirected themselves, destroying bridges and roads that the Empire relied on for movement. Wildlife moved unpredictably, forcing soldiers to adjust their tactics constantly. Humans, unaware of the larger interstellar battle, adapted naturally, repairing, rerouting, and improvising. Their actions were simple, everyday responses, but combined, they created an intricate defense that the Empire could not understand. The scouts who had first warned about Earth watched in grim satisfaction. They had been dismissed as alarmists, yet now their words had become the truth of the moment. Earth was not only resisting, it was learning. Every mistake the Empire made seemed to teach the planet's systems. Every miscalculation was absorbed and responded to. The Empire was no longer the hunter. It was a guest in a place that refused to submit. Communication breakdown spread across the fleet. Ships that were supposed to coordinate movements began drifting off course. Orders were delayed or misunderstood. Even the most advanced artificial intelligence systems failed, overwhelmed by signals and interference that had no clear source. The soldiers began to feel isolated and trapped, as if the planet itself had surrounded them with invisible walls. Fear began to grow among the troops, fear of a world they had assumed would be conquered easily. Despite these failures, the leadership refused to admit that the Empire had misjudged Earth. Retreat was never considered an option. Instead, they intensified the effort. More troops were sent, more weapons deployed, more energy spent trying to force the planet into submission. But the harder they pushed, the more the planet resisted. Every success they achieved was temporary. Every plan crumbled under subtle, unpredictable forces. Even simple attempts to control resources failed. Machines sent to extract minerals would break down, contaminated by unexpected environmental factors. Water purification systems would fail after brief use. Energy generators would short-circuit. The planet seemed to anticipate each move before it happened, its systems responding faster than the Empire could calculate. Officers whispered about it among themselves, but in public, they maintained the image of control. Pride demanded it, but reality was growing impossible to ignore. Humans on the surface remained largely unaware of the cosmic scale of the battle. Farmers continued to harvest crops, children played in the streets, and city workers repaired roads and power lines disrupted by storms. Yet in doing so, they unwittingly participated in the planet's defense. their routines, their adaptability, their ability to respond to unexpected events. Everything that humans did instinctively frustrated the Empire's operations. It was not a conventional army defending the planet. It was life itself, responding with precision and intelligence beyond anything the Empire could recognize. Inside the flagship, officers began to argue among themselves. Some admitted that the invasion was failing, while others demanded even more aggressive action. Tensions grew and the chain of command began to strain. The scouts who had delivered the original warning remained silent observers, knowing that their earlier advice had been ignored and that now the Empire was paying the price. Every machine failure, every misstep by the soldiers, every unexpected storm reinforced the truth they had tried to convey. Earth was a trap, and the Empire had walked right into it. The soldiers themselves grew anxious. They were trained for battle, trained for victory, but no training had prepared them for an opponent that could adapt without even thinking. The planet's defenses were organic, invisible, and unpredictable. Every step forward was met with new challenges. Supplies that should have arrived on time were delayed or destroyed. Communication with the flagship was intermittent at best. Troops began to rely on improvisation, but even their best efforts were only partially effective. Night fell across Earth, and the Empire's fleet hovered silently, battered but unwilling to leave. The humans below slept, worked, and moved through their lives unaware of the chaos they were causing. The first real confrontation had ended in failure for the Empire, and yet they did not fully understand why. Their arrogance, their pride, and their dismissal of the warning had brought them to this point. By the end of the third day, it was clear to the Empire that they were not simply facing a planet. They were facing a force that had intelligence of its own. Every calculation, every plan, every technological advantage had been countered in ways that no one could predict. The fleet had suffered losses, morale was low, and doubt had begun to spread among officers. The planet's quiet resistance had revealed a simple but terrifying truth. Power alone was not enough to dominate life itself. The scouts, though relieved to see the warning confirmed, were filled with unease. They knew that the Empire would not admit defeat easily. Pride and stubbornness would keep them trying to force the planet into submission. But each day that passed, the Empire faced frustration, failure, and loss. Every move they made seemed to strengthen the planet's defenses, not weaken them. As the night sky glowed with distant stars, the Empire's leaders faced a reality they had not anticipated. They were caught in a situation they could not control, struggling against a force that was both ordinary and extraordinary. Humans, animals, weather, and the planet itself worked together in ways invisible to the fleet, creating obstacles that were subtle but powerful. And so, the stage was set for the next chapter. The Empire had entered Earth with confidence, expecting an easy conquest. Instead, they found themselves trapped in a web of unpredictable resistance. Pride and power could not solve the problem, and their arrogance had led them into a battle they did not understand. The struggle was only beginning, and the consequences of ignoring the warning would become even more apparent in the days to come. Earth remained calm, seemingly ordinary, yet the subtle defenses continued to grow stronger with every action the Empire took. The invaders had no idea how to respond, and their attempts to force submission were becoming more desperate. Every misstep reinforced the planet's unseen intelligence, teaching it how to react to the Empire's tactics, and showing that the warning they had ignored was, in fact, real. The Empire had underestimated Earth, and now, with their forces stretched thin and their confidence shaken, they faced the realization that conquest was far more difficult than they had imagined. Life on Earth, ordinary and simple to human eyes, was proving to be the greatest challenge the Empire had ever faced. The Galactic Empire had been struggling against Earth for several weeks now, and the situation was growing worse by the day. What had started as a confident mission of conquest was turning into a nightmare. Every plan the Empire made seemed doomed to fail, and the soldiers, once sure of victory, were beginning to feel fear creeping into their hearts. The flagship hovered over the planet, its massive engines struggling to maintain position. The crew watched as smaller ships attempted to land troops and supplies, only to encounter unexpected failures. Vehicles stalled, engines overheated, and weapons misfired in ways that no engineer could explain. Even the most advanced automated systems were failing. Some ships simply disappeared in the atmosphere, swallowed by anomalies that the Empire could not understand. Panic began to spread quietly among the officers. On Earth, life continued as if nothing had changed, but the planet's subtle defenses were working tirelessly. Rivers flooded at precise moments, destroying makeshift roads and forcing troops to retreat. Storms developed suddenly, delaying supplies and slowing down military operations. Forests and mountains seemed to guide the movement of soldiers, redirecting them into areas where their machines would fail or their vehicles would become trapped. Every natural system, every living creature, was working in ways that the Empire could not anticipate. The humans themselves remained largely unaware of the cosmic conflict above them. Farmers repaired fences, children played in the streets, and workers fixed power lines disrupted by storms. Yet in their daily routines, they were unknowingly participating in the planet's defense. Their instinctive responses, their ability to adapt quickly to changing conditions, frustrated the Empire's plans at every turn. Soldiers could not understand why the simplest operations were failing repeatedly. Inside the flagship, tension was growing. Officers argued constantly, blaming each other for mistakes they did not commit. The scientists who had originally warned about Earth were ignored at first, but now their knowledge and observations were being scrutinized in desperation. Some proposed retreat, quietly suggesting that the planet was beyond their control. Others demanded more aggressive action, insisting that the Empire could never allow failure. Pride and fear clashed violently in the command room, creating a sense of chaos that mirrored what was happening on the planet below. Troops on the ground were exhausted. They had been operating in an environment that seemed to shift constantly, responding to every action they took. Machines failed when they were most needed. Supplies disappeared before they could reach their destinations. Communication systems malfunctioned, leaving units isolated and vulnerable. Even the most disciplined soldiers began to feel hopelessness, realizing that Earth was not like any world they had ever encountered. The subtle intelligence of the planet had now become impossible to ignore. Every miscalculation the Empire made taught the planet how to respond. Every failed attempt to control territory or resources seemed to strengthen Earth's defenses. Storms adjusted their timing, rivers changed their flow, and even wildlife appeared to move in ways that hindered the invaders. The planet was learning, and the Empire had no idea how to fight it. The scouts who had initially sent warnings felt a mix of satisfaction and dread. Their predictions had come true, yet the Empire was still unwilling to admit the truth. Pride prevented the leaders from acknowledging their mistake, even as their fleets suffered devastating losses. Ships were being damaged beyond repair, troops were being trapped or lost, and morale was dropping fast. Yet the Empire continued to push forward, unwilling to retreat. Human activity on the surface continued to frustrate the Empire, though the people themselves remained unaware. Ordinary actions: a farmer moving his animals away from a flooded area, a worker repairing a broken bridge, a group of hikers taking a detour through the mountains, had unexpected consequences. Each movement disrupted the Empire's carefully laid plans, forcing soldiers to adapt constantly to challenges they could not predict. Every day, the planet seemed to grow stronger, its defenses more precise. Inside the flagship, officers began to fear openly. Calculations had failed, instruments were unreliable, and even the most advanced technology could not overcome the planet's defenses. Morale was dropping sharply. Soldiers whispered to one another about the possibility of retreat, but no one dared voice it openly. Pride and fear of shame kept the Empire locked in place, even as losses mounted and chaos spread. Desperation led to reckless actions. The Empire tried to bombard regions of the planet to force submission, but natural defenses countered every attack. Storms redirected energy beams, magnetic anomalies caused weapons to fail, and terrain shifts trapped vehicles and troops. The planet had become a living fortress, its subtle intelligence turning every act of aggression against the invaders. Every attempt to break through strengthened the planet's hold over them. As the days passed, the Empire's situation worsened. Troops were exhausted, ships were damaged, and the chain of command was strained to its limits. Officers argued over strategy, blaming one another for mistakes that were beyond human control. Every failure reinforced the reality that Earth was not a simple planet to conquer. The warning that had been ignored, "Earth is a trap," was no longer just a phrase. It was a reality they could no longer escape. The humans below remained unaware of the scale of the disaster unfolding above them. Children played in the streets, workers repaired roads, and communities responded to natural challenges as they always had. Yet in their ordinary actions, they were part of a larger invisible system that protected the planet. The empires, troops no matter how advanced, could not predict or control these subtle defenses. Each day, they became more aware that they were facing an opponent unlike any they had ever encountered. By the end of the 4th week, the Empire's leadership faced a critical choice. Retreat could save the remaining forces, but pride and fear of humiliation prevented them from considering it. Aggression had failed, strategy had failed, and technology had failed. The planet's subtle intelligence had turned the once confident fleet into a group struggling for survival. Every failure, every loss, every setback reinforced one undeniable truth. Earth was not a planet to be conquered, and the Empire had underestimated it completely. The flagship hovered silently over the planet as night fell, the stars reflecting off its damaged hull. The officers and soldiers were exhausted, morale at its lowest point. The scouts who had warned of Earth's danger could only watch, knowing that the Empire's arrogance had brought them here. Earth had defended itself without violence, without armies, without visible weapons. Its intelligence, adaptability, and subtle coordination had become the Empire's greatest enemy. And yet, despite all the failures, the Empire refused to admit defeat. The leaders clung to pride, insisting that retreat was unthinkable. But every day spent on the planet brought more losses, more chaos, and more frustration. The subtle defenses of Earth had turned a simple invasion into a struggle the Empire was not prepared to fight. As the night deepened, the planet below remained calm, almost serene. But the Empire knew it was trapped, caught in a battle that could not be won with technology or force alone. The humans continued their lives, unaware of the cosmic conflict above them, yet their everyday actions were part of a defense so precise that it had already destroyed the Empire's confidence. Earth had become a trap, not through violence but through life itself. Its storms, rivers, forests, wildlife, and humans all worked together in ways that the Empire could not predict. Pride, arrogance, and ignorance had brought the invaders to the edge of disaster. The warning had been clear, yet it had been ignored, and now the consequences were undeniable. The stage was set for the final confrontation. The Empire had entered Earth with confidence and power, but it had encountered something far greater than machines or weapons. It had encountered life itself, unpredictable, adaptive, and impossible to conquer through force alone. The next chapter would decide whether the Empire could survive the trap it had ignored, or whether Earth would continue to prove that intelligence and adaptability can outmatch even the greatest power in the galaxy. The Galactic Empire had now spent weeks struggling against Earth, and what had started as a confident invasion had turned into chaos. Ships were damaged, troops were trapped, and every plan had failed. Officers who had once been proud and commanding now whispered in fear and frustration, realizing that the planet they had dismissed as primitive had outsmarted them at every turn. The flagship, once a symbol of the Empire's power, now floated over the planet with a battered hull and broken systems. Crew members moved cautiously, constantly monitoring the planet below, expecting attacks that never came but feeling the invisible pressure of the world resisting them. Every ship in orbit had suffered losses. Small drones destroyed, larger vessels crippled by failures no one could explain. The Empire's technology, once unstoppable, now seemed fragile against the subtle intelligence of Earth. The humans on the surface continued their lives without realizing how close they were to being part of history. Farmers worked in their fields, engineers repaired infrastructure damaged by storms, and children played in the streets, their laughter echoing harmlessly while above them. Massive fleets struggled to maintain order. Every ordinary action they took, moving livestock, adjusting irrigation, clearing debris, disrupted the Empire's carefully calculated operations. It was not strategy in the military sense, but it worked perfectly, frustrating every plan of the invaders. Inside the flagship, officers struggled to maintain control. Calculations failed repeatedly. Instruments that should have been precise now produced errors beyond explanation. Communications with ground forces were inconsistent, and morale was at an all-time low. Generals and scientists debated endlessly, but there were no solutions. Retreat was considered by some, but pride, fear of humiliation, and the chain of command kept them committed. The Empire could not leave, not yet, even as they realized how badly they had misjudged the planet. The subtle intelligence of Earth was now impossible to ignore. Natural systems reacted to the Empire's every move. Storms intensified when needed, rivers changed course, and terrain seemed to guide troops into areas where machines would fail. Wildlife moved unpredictably, disrupting machinery and forcing soldiers to adapt constantly. Even human behavior, completely untrained for warfare, had become part of a larger unseen defense system. Ordinary actions now had extraordinary consequences. The Empire's soldiers, exhausted and disoriented, began to lose hope. They had trained for victory, for predictable responses, for environments they could control. Yet Earth refused to conform. Every step forward was met with resistance, not from weapons or armies, but from life itself. Adaptive, intelligent, and impossible to dominate. Soldiers whispered to one another, wondering if retreat was the only option, but no one dared say it aloud. Pride, fear, and disbelief held them in place. As days passed, the losses mounted. Ships fell out of orbit. Entire units were trapped or destroyed, and supplies were lost to floods, storms, or simple mechanical failures. Officers realized that the Empire's advantage in technology had been neutralized by unpredictability.
Calculations had failed.
Logic had failed. Strategy had failed. Earth was winning without a single direct attack. The scouts who had originally warned the Empire about Earth felt a grim satisfaction, knowing that the warning had been accurate. They had been ignored, dismissed, and ridiculed, but now the Empire faced the consequences. Every machine failure, every lost unit, every setback proved that Earth was more than it seemed. Yet even the scouts knew that the Empire would not admit defeat easily. Pride and fear of shame would keep them trapped in their futile efforts for as long as possible. The humans below remained unaware, continuing their ordinary lives as storms passed and rivers changed course. They repaired, adapted, and moved naturally, not knowing they were part of a larger system defending the planet. The Empire struggled to understand the simplicity and brilliance of it. Intelligence did not always come in machines or armies. It could come from life itself, unpredictable and adaptive, yet perfect in its own way. Inside the flagship, tension reached its peak. Officers argued over orders, strategies, and blame. Some suggested retreat openly, but others insisted that the Empire could never admit failure. Pride and fear kept them in place, even as it became clear that their forces were in danger of total destruction. Each day spent on the planet increased losses, drained morale, and weakened their control. The Empire was caught in a trap it could not see clearly, and every attempt to force submission made things worse. Finally, after countless failed attempts to control the planet, the Empire's leadership had to accept one undeniable truth. They were beaten not by force but by life itself. Every machine, every calculation, every tactic had been rendered ineffective by the subtle, adaptive intelligence of Earth. The planet's defenses had been quiet, patient, and invisible, yet powerful enough to turn an unstoppable force into a struggling, desperate fleet. The Empire began a slow, reluctant withdrawal. Troops and ships retreated, damaged and demoralized, leaving behind equipment and resources they had hoped to claim. For the first time in history, the Empire had faced a defeat not at the hands of another civilization, but by a planet and its life itself. The warning, "Earth is a trap," had finally been understood, but it had come too late to prevent humiliation. Back on Earth, life continued as if nothing had happened. Humans repaired what was broken, adapted to changes in weather, and continued their routines. The planet itself remained calm, serene, and alive. It had defended itself without armies, without weapons, and without visible violence. Its subtle intelligence had been enough to repel one of the greatest powers in the galaxy. The Empire's retreat became a story that would be studied for generations. Officers and scientists tried to understand how a planet could resist in such a way, how ordinary life and natural systems could create an unbeatable defense. Pride, arrogance, and ignorance had brought them to the edge of disaster, and the lesson was clear. Intelligence could appear in unexpected forms, and no civilization should underestimate the subtle power of life. In the end, the Empire had learned humility the hard way. Earth had not fought like other planets or civilizations. It had defended itself through adaptation, resilience, and the intelligence of life itself. Soldiers returned, broken and exhausted, but alive. The fleet, battered and demoralized, moved back into space, leaving the blue planet untouched and unconquered. And so, Earth remained, ordinary yet extraordinary, calm yet deadly in its subtle ways. Humans continued their lives, unaware of the cosmic event that had unfolded above them, yet part of a defense so precise and intelligent that it had repelled one of the greatest powers in the galaxy. The Empire had disregarded the warning, and the cost had been great. But the lesson was now clear. Life, in its simplest forms, could be more powerful than even the most advanced technology. The story of the Empire's defeat became a legend, a reminder across the galaxy that arrogance and pride could blind even the most powerful. The warning, "Earth is a trap," was remembered, whispered among officers and scholars, a lesson that could never be forgotten. And so the galaxy learned that sometimes victory does not come from force, strategy, or intelligence alone. It comes from understanding, respect, and the recognition that life itself, even in its most ordinary forms, can be the greatest defender of all.